In the humble and simple streets of Buenos Aires, where the morning light filters through the red brick alleys, a boy was born on December 17, 1936. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the name the world would later know by another name, Pope Francis, grew up in a family of ordinary Italian immigrants. Something was always burning inside him, a strange, gentle but profound fire, which he later understood was the first call of Jesus. Jorge's childhood was not spent in the noise of power or ambition, but in the evening prayers of his grandmother, in simple meals with his parents, and in Bible stories told with the heart, not just with words. Even as the outside world was churning with turmoil, war, injustice, poverty, inside the boy, another world was taking shape, the world of faith, of the silent but clear presence of God. At the age of 12, Jorge felt an indescribable vibration for the first time when he stood before the statue of Christ crucified in a small church. He stood there for a long time, without saying a word, but in his heart, a question began to resound, and would follow him for the rest of his life. Lord, what do you want me to do for you? The question was not answered immediately. Like many other teenagers, Jorge had very ordinary dreams. He loved science, thought about becoming a doctor, and even studied chemistry for a short time. But wherever he went, whatever he read, whoever he talked to, that call silently returned, becoming clearer and clearer, not with his voice, but with a strange urge that made him unable to keep silent before the suffering of others, unable to ignore the eyes of the forgotten. One day, while on his way to visit friends, Jorge decided to go into a church. He didn't know what made him stop there, but when he went in and confessed to a priest he had never met, everything changed. After leaving the confessional, Jorge was no longer the hesitant schoolboy. Something had ripened in his heart, God had called him, and he said yes. In 1958, Jorge entered the Jesuits, a decision that went against many expectations from his family and society. At that time, Argentina was going through political and cultural upheaval. The country was in turmoil, and the church was being challenged from many sides. But Jorge wasn't looking for stability. He was looking for truth. And in Jesus, he found his reason for living. Monastic life is not easy. There are long days of silence, seemingly endless spiritual winters, and moments of doubt and despair, when faith is tested to the limit. But Jorge learned one thing: Jesus did not come to eliminate suffering, but to accompany people in suffering. And it was in those dark hours that Jorge discovered the true depth of faith, not a feeling, not a certainty, but a belief in the midst of things not seen. As a novice, Jorge once wrote in his diary, "I do not know where the path God has for me will lead, but I believe that He will never leave me, even if I go far from Him." Those trembling lines became a silent confession that accompanied him throughout his later journey. After many years of study, prayer and service, Jorge was ordained a priest in 1969. That day, he did not stand on a high platform. There was no applause, no flowers. Only a trembling soul said, "Lord, I belong to you." That sentence was not only the first prayer, but the guiding principle for the rest of his life. From small parishes in Buenos Aires, Jorge walked to the poor, the addicts, the single mothers, the street children. He did not preach with words, but with a silent presence. He believed that Jesus did not need good sermons, but hands that touched the wounds of people. And Jorge became those hands, imperfect hands, but ready to serve. He asked his students not to live in theological ivory towers, but to go out into the streets, live among the people, and listen to their silent cries. During the long evenings, he would kneel in prayer, alone in the small chapel, asking God to help him not to lose his mercy. For Jorge, the greatest danger was not losing faith, but living faith without mercy. And so Jorge's journey continued. No one knew that the humble priest would become the first pope to bear the name Francis. But Jesus knew. And he led Jorge through every step, every twist, every dark night, as he led Peter across the water, as he called Matthew away from the tax collector's booth. Pope Francis' journey of faith did not begin in St. Peter's Square. It began with a heart that was moved by suffering, a soul that dared to listen, and a small yes but sincere. When Jorge Mario Bergoglio was ordained a bishop in 1992, he chose as his episcopal motto Miserando atque eligendo, he looked at me with mercy and chose me. That motto was not just a quote, but the entire spirituality that the bishop wanted to live, a life surrounded by God's mercy. And from there acting, giving as auxiliary bishop in Buenos Aires, and then archbishop, Bergoglio did not live in an executive office or at the ecclesiastical council table. He chose the places that Jesus chose, the poor, the forgotten, the places where people no longer thought God was present. The people of the Argentine capital were used to seeing an archbishop walking through the slums, riding the public bus, standing in line like everyone else to buy a ticket for the metro. Many did not know who he was at first. He did not wear a gold cross, had no retinue, and did not bless the streets. But it was his simple way of life that made him stand out more than any vestment. For Bergoglio, preaching the gospel was inseparable from concrete action. He did not hesitate to criticize social injustice, corruption, and the exploitation of the poor, not with the tone of a political activist, but with the urgency of a pastor. He believed that Jesus was still crucified today in the unemployed, in homeless children, in those abandoned in hospitals with no one to visit. In meetings of the Argentine Bishops' Conference, he was quiet but always straightforward. He stressed that the Church could not be concerned only with its institutional structures, but must become a field hospital for souls wounded by life. At the time, few thought that a straightforward, undiplomatic bishop like Bergoglio would go far. But because of that, he became a symbol of a new kind of leadership through service. There is a story that, on a rainy night, he personally went to the church to make beds for the homeless. When the doorman discovered and tried to stop him, he just smiled. This is their house, and the house of God has no closing time. Not long after, Bergoglio was appointed cardinal. This news surprised many people, including himself. During the Red Hat ceremony in Rome, among the cardinals in formal robes, Bergoglio kept a simple demeanor. He returned to Buenos Aires not as a more powerful person, but as one who had to live even more humbly. When he became cardinal, he did not move into the official bishop's residence, but chose to live in a small room where he could receive ordinary visitors, cook alone, and pray in silence. In his pastoral letters to the priests of his diocese, he often wrote by hand, in a language that was familiar but full of spiritual depth. He told them not to just care about rituals, but to engage in the real lives of the people. He told the seminarians, if you are afraid of getting your hands dirty when you touch real life, don't be a priest. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, not with gloves. No one knew that those pastoral thoughts, simple but decisive, were the seeds of a coming pontificate. He did not seek office, but his faith in action quietly paved the way for a historic event. On March 13, 2013, white smoke rose from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. In a moment of silence, the name Bergoglio rang out on the lips of the cardinal announcing the good news. The whole of St. Peter's Square fell silent, then exploded in applause and tears. And for the first time in history, a pope bears the name Francis, the name of the poor saint of Assisi, who left everything to live the gospel to the full. The name is not just a symbol. It is a proclamation. The Church must return to Jesus, who is poor, humble and merciful. When Pope Francis stepped onto the balcony, people noticed the difference not only in his simple clothes or his gentle smile, but in the way he bowed his head and asked the people to pray for him before giving his blessing. It was the gesture of a true shepherd, one who understands that he is also a pilgrim on a journey of faith, not standing on high but walking beside the flock. From that day on, The Pope's journey of faith was no longer just a personal life. It became a guiding light for millions of people. And it is this faith, silent, concrete, full of mercy, that becomes a strong invitation for the whole Church to become true disciples of Jesus. Not only in the Church, but in the midst of today's wounded life. People still recall that moment, the afternoon of March 13, 2013, as a moment beyond history, when the Catholic Church, after centuries, chose a son from the ends of the earth to lead its global flock. Not a prominent Vatican diplomat, nor a renowned theologian, but a man known for his quiet, simple lifestyle, and dislike of the limelight, Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio of Argentina. When the bell rang to announce the election of a new pope, the crowd in St. Peter's Square erupted in cheers. But when the name Bergoglio was announced, many remained silent, unsure of who he was. Then the bigger question immediately arose: why him? The answer did not come from political strategy or lobbying. It comes from the Holy Spirit, as every previous pope has believed, and from the quiet but consistent witness of a man who has lived the gospel in action all his life. What first surprised the world was not what Pope Francis said, but what he did. When he first appeared, he did not wear the traditional red vestments of a new pope, but a simple white one. He did not raise his hands to bless the people right away, but bowed his head and asked them to pray for him first. No flowery words, no authoritative gestures, just a shepherd, walking among his flock, with gentle eyes and a calm face. From the beginning, he broke many conventions. He did not live in the magnificent apostolic palace, but chose to stay in a single room in the Santa Marta guest house. He carried his own suitcase, paid for the hotel where he stayed during the days of the conclave, and every morning, he celebrates Mass in the small chapel, preaching in everyday language. Simple, but moving. He wants the Church to go out of itself. No longer a self-referential church, but a church that goes out to the peripheries, not only geographically, but also to the peripheries of humanity, places of poverty, places of exclusion, places where people have lost their dignity. He said, "I dream of a poor church for the poor. A church that is not afraid to get dirty when it goes out into the streets." That is not just a beautiful statement. It is the pastoral direction to which he is committed. He has gone to places no one would expect a pope to go: refugee camps, prisons, AIDS hospitals, slums in Brazil, Africa, and even war-torn places like Syria and Iraq. Wherever there is suffering, Francis has left his footprints. One of the actions that moved the world was when he bent down to wash the feet of prisoners, including Muslims and women, going against the long-standing tradition reserved for Catholic men. When asked why he did so, he simply smiled. Jesus made no distinction when he washed feet. Pope Francis also did not hesitate to raise big questions for the Church itself. He called on the clergy to stay away from clericalism, learn to listen to the laity, and especially never lose the smell of the sheep, that is, closeness, sympathy, and sharing with the flock they shepherd. He did not want priests to preach only from books, but to live in reality, understanding each spiritual wound of people. When it comes to family, marriage, young people, homosexuals, divorced people, he does not make judgments, but starts from mercy. In a famous interview, when asked about homosexuals, he responded with a touching statement: "If a person has goodwill, seeks God, who am I to judge them?" He did not change the doctrine of the Church, but he changed the way the Church communicates with the world. Instead of starting with the law, he started with mercy. Instead of closing the door, he opened the door of the heart. For him, Jesus is not the first judge, but the first companion of humanity. In Francis's pontificate, words like law, prohibition, punishment are softened by words like accompanying, healing, loving, listening. He does not deny the truth, but he affirms that true truth must go hand in hand with mercy. From the Vatican, he sends a message of world solidarity. calls for the protection of the environment, Laudato Si, promotes interreligious dialogue, promotes peace, and constantly speaks out for migrants, refugees, and victims of war and violence. He is not just a pope for Catholics, he has become the conscience of humanity in troubled times. John Paul II was once called the Pope of Hope. Benedict XVI the Pope of Reason. Francis is, without a doubt, the Pope of Mercy. And it all starts from one thing, a living faith and action from the heart in close union with Jesus. Since assuming the role of successor of Peter, Pope Francis has shown that he does not live in the ivory tower of the Vatican. His heart beats with the world, especially with those who are groaning in suffering, injustice, and oblivion. More than a ceremonial pope, Francis has become a pilgrim, carrying with him the gentle face of Jesus, going to places where the church has not gone for a long time. He is not afraid to go far. Each of the Pope's apostolic trips is a living testimony that the church is still present, still listening, still suffering with the pain of humanity. In Lampedusa, the island on the border of Europe, he embraced each body of a migrant who drowned while trying to cross the sea. In the Mediterranean sun and wind, with tears in his eyes, he said, "We have lost the ability to cry. The sea has become a cemetery. And I have come here to pray for them, and for us, who have grown accustomed to indifference." In the silence of the ocean, the cry for help of millions of excluded people was heard, thanks to his voice. In Iraq, a country devastated by war and divided by religion, he was the first pope in history to dare to set foot. He walked among the ruins, shook hands with Muslims, Jews and Christians, saying with all his conviction, religion must never be the source of violence. Religion must be a bridge to peace. He did not use the power of a leader, but the silent, solid presence of someone who knows how to listen, to share, to cry with those who cry. That is why, although not everyone agrees with his stance, one cannot ignore his sincerity. In Africa, he did not come with a luxurious entourage, but went to the children in the slums of Kenya, ate a simple meal with them, sat on the floor listening to their laughter mixed with tears. He told them, "You are seeds of hope. Light in the darkness." In the Amazon, in the middle of the vast jungle, he listened to the cry of the indigenous people, who were exploited and silently exterminated. He spoke out in defense of nature, in defense of life, and invited all of humanity to reflect, what are we doing to our common home? He was not only physically present, but also spiritually present in global historical moments. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world, causing panic and division, he stepped out into the middle of an empty St. Peter's Square, in the rain, under the silent yellow light. He is alone, but powerful. During the special prayer on March 27, 2020, he raised the Blessed Sacrament amid the silence of the world. As if in a gesture of urgency, we are all in the same boat, and only God saves us. That homily, short, gentle, but like sacred fire, became a prayer for all humanity. Not only Catholics, but also non-believers, felt one thing: this Pope was weeping for the world. From his speeches at the United Nations to his conferences on climate change, from his interreligious meetings to his meetings with victims of abuse in the church, Francis has constantly urged a church that has the courage to look at reality. He does not hide the church's mistakes, but he does not let the church be stuck in the past. He believes that Jesus always makes everything new. If people know how to repent, to go down to the roots of humility and love. Pope Francis does not seek to please everyone. He is not afraid of criticism, from within the church and from society. Some call him too progressive. Some say he dilutes the doctrine. But amid all the noise, he keeps his eyes on Jesus, the Good Shepherd, the silent companion, the bearer of the cross of every age. For Francis, accompanying is not a one-time thing, but an attitude. It is walking with others, with patience, empathy and faith. Therefore, every word he says, every trip he makes, Every simple gesture of his, be it a hug, a look, a smile, seems to say to the world, you are not alone. Jesus is walking with you. And so is the Church. Since assuming the role of successor of Peter, Pope Francis has shown that he does not live in the ivory tower of the Vatican. His heart beats with the world, especially with those who are groaning in suffering, injustice, and oblivion. More than a ceremonial pope, Francis has become a pilgrim, carrying with him the gentle face of Jesus. Going to places where the Church has not gone for a long time. He is not afraid to go far. Each of the Pope's apostolic trips is a living testimony that the Church is still present, still listening, still suffering with the pain of humanity. In Lampedusa, the island on the border of Europe, he embraced each body of a migrant who drowned while trying to cross the sea. In the Mediterranean sun and wind, with tears in his eyes, he said, we have lost the ability to cry. The sea has become a cemetery, and I have come here to pray for them, and for us, who have grown accustomed to indifference. In the silence of the ocean, the cry for help of millions of excluded people was heard, thanks to his voice. In Iraq, a country devastated by war and divided by religion, he was the first pope in history to dare to set foot. He walked among the ruins, shook hands with Muslims, Jews and Christians, saying with all his conviction, religion must never be the source of violence. Religion must be a bridge to peace. He did not use the power of a leader, but the silent, solid presence of someone who knows how to listen, to share, to cry with those who cry. That is why, although not everyone agrees with his stance, one cannot ignore his sincerity. In Africa, he did not come with a luxurious entourage, but went to the children in the slums of Kenya, ate a simple meal with them, sat on the floor listening to their laughter mixed with tears. He told them, you are seeds of hope, light in the darkness. In the Amazon, in the middle of the vast jungle, he listened to the cry of the indigenous people, who were exploited and silently exterminated. He spoke out in defense of nature, in defense of life, and invited all of humanity to reflect, what are we doing to our common home? He was not only physically present, but also spiritually present in global historical moments. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world, causing panic and division, he stepped out into the middle of an empty St. Peter's Square, in the rain, under the silent yellow light. He is alone, but powerful. During the special prayer on March 27, 2020, he raised the Blessed Sacrament amid the silence of the world. As if in a gesture of urgency, we are all in the same boat, and only God saves us. That homily, short, gentle, but like sacred fire, became a prayer for all humanity. Not only Catholics, but also non-believers, felt one thing: this Pope was weeping for the world. From his speeches at the United Nations to his conferences on climate change, from his interreligious meetings to his meetings with victims of abuse in the Church, Francis has constantly urged a Church that has the courage to look at reality. He does not hide the Church's mistakes, but he does not let the Church be stuck in the past. He believes that Jesus always makes everything new. If people know how to repent, to go down to the roots of humility and love. Pope Francis does not seek to please everyone. He is not afraid of criticism, from within the Church and from society. Some call him too progressive. Some say he dilutes the doctrine. But amid all the noise, he keeps his eyes on Jesus, the Good Shepherd, the silent companion, the bearer of the cross of every age. For Francis, accompanying is not a one-time thing, but an attitude. It is walking with others, with patience, empathy and faith. Therefore, every word he says, every trip he makes, every simple gesture of his, be it a hug, a look, a smile, seems to say to the world, you are not alone. Jesus is walking with you. And so is the Church. In today's world, a world full of change and challenges, the Church cannot remain on the sidelines. Pope Francis understands that if the Church were to remain closed off and not face the real problems of the world, it would become insignificant. He believes that the church must be a living environment, able to change and adapt, while remaining faithful to the essence of the gospel of Jesus. One of the major issues facing the Holy Father in these times is climate change. He has spoken out strongly about the harm caused by the destruction of nature. And in his encyclical Laudato Si, Praise be to God, he affirms that the relationship between humanity and nature is a relationship of faith. He calls on everyone in the church, as well as all of humanity, to take responsibility for our common home. He said, "Climate change is not a problem of one country or one generation, but a global problem. And we must act immediately if we want to save the earth." The Pope did not simply sound a warning, but also urged concrete actions. He encouraged the Church to live more simply, to save more, to reduce its impact on the environment, and to support initiatives to protect nature everywhere. He stressed that a church can serve the world only if it becomes a sign of change. Conflict and war are also issues that pain and concern the Pope. He has constantly called for peace, condemning violence, especially wars of aggression and destruction. The Pope has spoken out frankly about the war in Syria, Ukraine, and other conflicts, and has always stressed the importance of dialogue between peoples and religions in the search for peaceful solutions. He has always insisted that the Church cannot sit idly by while innocent people are destroyed in war. In one of his homilies, he said, "We cannot continue to ignore the suffering of our brothers and sisters. We cannot sit back and watch the world being destroyed by war and hatred. Peace must be our common goal." For the Holy Father, every war is not only a physical war but also a spiritual war. It is a war between good and evil, between love and hatred. And Jesus is the only solution to all these conflicts. Francis invites the Church to bear witness to peace, through small but powerful gestures such as prayer, charity, and opening our arms to others. The issue of migration and refugees is also one of the areas in which the Holy Father has been constantly speaking out. He has taken concrete actions to support refugees by personally welcoming and hosting them. He not only made appeals from the Holy See but also invited countries to open their doors and create conditions for refugees to find a new life. During a visit to Lesbos, home to Greece's largest refugee camp, the Holy Father made a powerful symbolic gesture. He welcomed and brought to Rome several refugee families. This gesture not only had a profound humanitarian message but also served as a strong reminder of the responsibility of the entire international community in treating the less fortunate. The consumer society and the gap between rich and poor are issues that the Holy Father cannot ignore. He has repeatedly criticized the free market economy, where money becomes a god and the poor are marginalized. In Evangelii Gaudium, he warned, an economy that discards people leads to a throwaway culture. A society that is only interested in money and forgets human dignity destroys itself. The Holy Father stressed that the Church cannot stand aside in the face of social injustice, poverty, and the gap between rich and poor. He called for an economy of sharing rather than accumulation. An economy that puts people at the center, not money. In addition to facing global problems, Pope Francis also faces challenges within the Church. He has not been afraid to acknowledge the shortcomings of the Church, especially regarding the sexual abuse scandals and the lack of transparency in handling these issues. The Holy Father has affirmed that the Church needs to truly repent, needs to protect the vulnerable, and especially needs to take strong measures to protect children from all forms of abuse. The Holy Father has decided to establish a tribunal to handle abuse cases, and at the same time has established measures so that the Church can face this problem in a transparent and serious manner. He called on the Church to relive its faith through action, and not just to maintain a religious form but to be the living embodiment of a loving community. Pope Francis not only faces the challenges of the present, but also has a vision for the future. He sees in difficulties the challenges of the world and the Church, not the end, but opportunities for rebirth and growth. In his conversations with the faithful and in his messages, he constantly emphasizes that no matter how difficult the world may be, Hope is always the guiding light for all those who seek the truth and love of God. Hope in trials. Francis is not one to shy away from the truth about the difficulties of the world. He acknowledges that today's world is full of problems, injustice, war, racism, and environmental crisis. However, what he wants to convey is not pessimism or despair, but hope. He believed that it was in the darkest moments of humanity that the light of Jesus shone, and that only when we live in love and hope can the world be transformed. He once said, "Hope is a virtue that must be nurtured and cared for. And it is not an unrealistic hope, but a solid hope based on trust in God." In his homilies, the Holy Father emphasized that hope is not something that comes easily, but is the result of a constant effort to work for justice and love for others. It is a life of prayer, service and sacrifice. Every step a believer takes is a step closer to the perfection that God intends for it. The Church of the Future, a church of love and unity. Pope Francis sees a church of the future not as a church closed in on itself, but as a church open to the world, where love and unity are the foundations on which all relationships are built. He dreams of a church that is not only a place for liturgical celebrations, but a sign of unity and service. For him, the Church of the Future is not only a place to preserve and protect the faith, but a community that opens its arms to everyone, especially the weak and marginalized. To do this, he calls for a renewal in the way all believers think and act, not only at the level of the clergy but also at the level of the laity. Each person has a mission, and no one is without value in the Church. He believes that the Church of the Future must be a church that does not only teach, but a living church, where everyone can actively participate in the work of the Church. This is not a request, but a call for all believers to become evangelizers through their actions in daily life. The Holy Father also dreams of a church that does not only see the poor as people in need, but one that sees the poor as teachers of humility and unconditional love. He calls on the Church of the Future to always be a church of the poor, where everyone can feel God's care and love. The world of the future, a world of peace and justice. For the Holy Father, the world of the future is a world where peace and justice are not just ideals, but realities. He wants a world free of senseless wars, discrimination, pain and poverty. He sees a world where everyone lives with respect for one another, where each individual is treated with the utmost dignity. One of the images he wishes to see in the future is a global community united to solve global problems such as climate change, migration, and social injustice. The Holy Father believes that the world can change if people work together for a common goal, and if we live with love and compassion for those around us. He also believes that a just and peaceful future is one that overcomes greed, discrimination, and the worship of material things. Francis said that if people return to the fundamental values of the gospel, if people know how to live together in love, all current problems can be solved in a sustainable and effective way. Vision for the future of the Church, feeling God in every moment. An important part of the Pope's vision is a flexible and renewed church, where every believer can feel God in every moment of life, from prayer to the simplest actions of daily life. He called on everyone in the Church to pay attention to the signs of God in life. And from there, the life of faith is not just a religious ritual but a way of life, a journey of love and service. Francis also encouraged all believers to continue to open their hearts to receive. Finally, when looking to the future of the Church and the world, Pope Francis always affirms a single truth: love and hope in Jesus are the key to help us overcome all the trials, difficulties and sufferings in this life. He never fails to remind us that God's love is unconditional, always open to everyone, regardless of race, nationality or social class. Throughout all his messages, sermons and actions, Pope Francis always reaffirms that the Church must live and testify to that love. The love of Jesus is not a theoretical or abstract love, but a practical love, expressed through concrete actions and service. For him, that love must be lived in every gesture, in every encounter and in every decision we make. From the smallest actions such as helping the poor, to the great decisions about peace and justice. Jesus, the center of everything. Pope Francis never fails to emphasize that everything in the life of believers must originate from Jesus, the absolute center and model of love and hope. He teaches that, while the world may change and evolve, Jesus remains the eternal destination toward which we must all strive. The Pope advises that all believers must keep Jesus at the center of their lives, not only in religious moments, but also in work, relationships, and in every decision we make. He reminds us that the hope we have in Jesus is a hope that cannot be destroyed, because Jesus is the risen one, and thanks to his resurrection, we can all hope for a new future. A future in which God's justice and love will triumph over all evil and darkness. Jesus is the source of all hope, and he himself, with his infinite love, calls each one of us to return to that love, so that we can share it with others, so that this world may become a place filled with light. Feeling God's presence in each person. One of the important things that Pope Francis always reminds us is that each believer needs to be aware of God's presence in himself or herself and in those around him or her. He teaches that we cannot truly love God without loving others, and that serving others is the way we serve God. The Holy Father often speaks of Jesus' presence in the poor, the sick, refugees, and especially in those whom society often ignores or ignores. He said that every time we see a poor person, a suffering person, a person who is rejected, we are seeing Jesus, because he himself chose to live in poverty and suffering to share with us in every situation. The Holy Father calls on all believers not only to worship God in church, but to find God in every moment of life, in every person we meet. Unconditional love, the sign of Jesus. God's unconditional love is an important theme in the Holy Father's teachings. He emphasized that Jesus does not love us because we deserve it, but loves us because he is love, and his love has no boundaries. The Holy Father invited all believers to be a sign of that unconditional love, to love without expecting anything in return. Love others as God loves us is a powerful and challenging call, but it is also the only way to build a just and compassionate church and world. The Holy Father encourages everyone to follow the example of Jesus, to love even when kidnapped, hurt, or abandoned, because love is the only force that can transform the world. Hope and resurrection. Finally, Pope Francis always reminds us that hope is the soul of every action in the Christian life. No matter how many trials, sufferings, and darkness the world faces, Jesus is the source of eternal hope. It is in these trials that believers can recognize the presence of God, and it is in that hope that we can find the strength to continue moving forward. He shared that hope in Jesus is not a vague or illustrative hope, but a sure hope for a better future, a future in which God's love will conquer all evil, and all suffering will be healed. This is the message that the Holy Father always wants to convey to everyone, that, whatever the world is like, Jesus is always the eternal hope. And only when we know how to live in his love and hope can we build a better world, filled with peace and justice. Conclusion. Pope Francis has shown us that in a world full of turmoil, love and hope in Jesus are the only light that can guide humanity through difficulties and challenges. It is the presence of God in each person, and the hope of the resurrection, that will be the solid foundation that helps the Church and the world overcome all challenges, and at the same time open up a future filled with love and peace.